Welcome to Casey Cares, the voice of Kansas City nonprofits. We share the stories of people. Cares, we connect the nonprofit and the business sectors to enhance the quality of life in Kansas City for our residents and our visitors. This Casey Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, www.kaufman.org. I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis. It's time for our monthly Ask the Expert episode, where we tackle the issues shaping the nonprofit sector with some of its most respected leaders. Today, we're joined by none other than Dr. Philanthropy himself, Jeffrey Byrne, founder of the powerhouse fundraising firm Byrne-Pelofsky. We're going to dive into the newly released Giving USA, the annual report on philanthropy in the United States. It's the nation's most trusted source of charitable giving. Produced through research by the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University in collaboration with the Giving USA Foundation, the report offers a comprehensive look at charitable giving across the country for 2025. And here's the headline: Americans donated an incredible $607.2 billion to charity last year. It's a 3% increase when you adjust for inflation. Well, what do those numbers really mean? And which areas saw growth? Where are their challenges? And most importantly, what can nonprofits learn from this report as they plan their fundraising strategies? Dr. Philanthropy, let's jump in and make sense of the data.
Well, thank you, Ruth, and it's good to see you, and it's good to be here. I'm very excited to announce that giving crossed $600 billion, that $600 billion threshold, for the first time in the history of giving. In 2024, giving was approximately $592 billion. And this past year, it rose to $617.2 billion, which in real dollars versus inflation adjusted dollars that you mentioned, in real dollars, which I use my real checkbook in real dollars, it grew by 5.7%. So we are very excited about that for this year. It is 2025 does represent the largest overall year in absolute giving in dollars. So we're very excited about that. Overall, the charitable philanthropic sector is 2% of gross domestic product. And right before the session started with you and me today, I looked up what our overall gross domestic product dollars are in the United States. And we are a $30.7 trillion machine, the United States of America, in its economic power. And if we look at 2% of that coming from overall charity, that represents a very large segment of our overall domestic gross domestic product. We also know that about 10 to 12% of overall gross domestic product comes from the nonprofit sector as well. So, the nonprofit sector is about $3-something trillion, or triple what Elon Musk has as a trillionaire. So that puts it into some perspective when we think about this, that, America or the world has its first trillionaire, and that is a big deal. But philanthropy is about overall gross domestic product from charity is about $3 trillion as well. So we're very excited about that. There are two subsectors, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of the subsectors that are represented in the overall $617 billion of giving. But in two subsectors, we saw giving grow over to $100 billion or over $100 billion. One sector was giving to religion. And giving to religion, when I started out in fundraising 38 years ago, Ruth, in 1988, giving to religion accounted for 50% of overall gifts to charity by Americans. This past year, it's down to 23%. So over the last 38 years, basically, we've dropped from 50% of Americans giving to religion to 23% of Americans giving to religion. So you can see that religious giving, while still the number one sector that Americans are giving to with $151 billion, that sector is decreasing significantly. Every year it erodes by some 5+%. If we look at the other sector that reached $100 billion in giving last year, it was human services. So we know that human services took an uptick during COVID in 2020 and 2021, and it has remained very strong since then.
What do you attribute to the drop in the religious sector, although very significant? What is your take on that? What do you hear from the scientists out there?
Well, overall, there's a younger group of age bracket of Generation Z or X or even millennials that don't have the same attachment to religious giving and attendance of religious institutions as perhaps the baby boom generation, which I represent. So, when your butts aren't in the seat in a religious organization, you normally are not going to be giving to that religious organization or to your church, your parish, your synagogue, or your mosque. So, first of all, attendance. Second, I think the demographics of the age groupings, as we mentioned, I think that is a reason that giving has slowed down. It certainly has slowed down overall. It's certainly not going to be ticking up. And, human services and probably education, which was the third subsector that was the largest, those education and human services, if you total those up, those are nearly 30% of overall giving last year.
Can you talk a little bit about what I call the pie that this report has puts out, so you get a really illustrative look at it and where the big pieces of the pie are in terms of generosity? Where is that giving coming from?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked that, because we know that last year, giving from individuals was basically 64% of overall gifts. So if we take every $1 that was given to charity of the $617 billion, every dollar, 64 cents is given to by individuals. That's you and me, Ruth, and other individuals in America who are unbelievably generous. If we look at foundations, they gave 19 cents of every dollar, or 19% overall giving. It was above $100 billion of giving, like giving to religion and giving to human services was, but giving to foundations, bound by foundations, was $117 billion. And if we look at that over a 5-year period, it's growing by about 7.5% each year, which is very significant. And that tells me that high net worth individuals, high net worth families who have significant assets are taking advantage of the IRS laws and creating donor advised funds. They're creating foundations, and they're creating other vehicles for giving, which is very positive. Overall, the $617 billion religious giving was 10 cents of every dollar. And that grew very significantly last year, grew by 20% over 2024. And we can't precisely say why giving to bequest was 20% up last year, except we have two thoughts. Number one, people are planning better in their estates for charitable gifts. And that is true. People do, families do, individuals do plan their charitable giving in their estates. And we're very happy about that if that continues. Also, we know that very large estates that have very large bequests to charity are normal in an overall bequest year. So we don't know exactly which one of those, if it's estate planning by average Americans is making part of that increase, or if it's a few large gifts to charity. It'll take about a year to understand that through analysis of IRS records. And the last giving to by Americans was by corporations, and they gave approximately 7 cents of every dollar, or $43 billion. And that was about a 3% increase over 2024. And that's about the average of 5 to 7 cents of every dollar is coming from corporations. And corporations normally give during a good economy. And if inflation was only 2.7% last year, and corporate profits and corporate growth was significant. So a 3% uptick is a modest uptick, which I believe is a good thing for corporate giving.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago donor advised funds, DAFs, and that there seems to be tremendous growth in that area. What do you attribute that to? You were talking about families are planning bequests, but is it becoming easier to do a donor advised fund? Are there more opportunities to create that at different price points? And by price point, I mean by it's $1,000 to get in, to create a DAF versus, let's say, $10,000 to create a DAF with an organization.
That's right. Well, you're going to make available the infographic to our listeners from Giving USA 2026. And if I look at Giving USA 2026 dollars, I see where public giving to public society benefit organizations like your United Ways, your United Jewish Appeals, Catholic, perhaps Catholic Charities, all those, and giving to donor advised funds are considered giving to public society benefit. That was up 11 billion. That was up 11% over last year. It represented $72 billion. So, overall, that's 11% of giving. So what that tells me is that savvy donors through tax planning are utilizing community foundations and other private foundations unable to create donor advised funds and take many times complicated financial instruments or privately held companies and creating from those charitable profits to then put into donor advised funds to then give away to nonprofits. And, we've seen that donor advised funds have been a growing sector overall the last 38 years I've been involved in fundraising. And we will continue to see that because the tax laws are very favorable to donors who have complicated assets and want to disperse of those and create some charitable dollars to give away as well.
Well, I know we've had on Casey Cares some folks with the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. We've had a conversation about DAFs and how it's really a great tool if you're able to do it. So would encourage our viewers and listeners to check that out if you're, looking at your giving and other ways to maybe utilize that as a tool to do that. We're talking with Dr. of Philanthropy, Jeffrey Byrne of Byrne-Pelofsky, and we're trying to unwrap and look into the data of the recent Giving USA report. There's been growth overall. Is there any area where there's shrinking? And if so, where is that?
Mm-hmm. the giving to foundations, while it was very significant last year, and it was 19 cents of every dollar, giving to foundations did decrease by about 16% overall in 2025. However, the one sector that we find giving by bequests, we are finding that wealth transfer that we've talked about in philanthropy for the last 20 to 30 years, of anywhere from 35 to $100 trillion, is that wealth transfer is now estimated at between around $120 trillion over the next 20 to 25 years. And if we look at that, we are hoping, and indications in research and giving are coming in, that there could be about a $20 trillion transfer of the $120 trillion. 20 trillion of that could transfer into charities. So that could almost triple the amount of giving by Americans over the next 20, 25 years, if that does come about. And we are seeing an uptick in bequest giving. So just like we saw an uptick of 20% this year in bequest giving, will we continue to see that over the next 20, 25 years as Americans transfer $120 trillion to family members and to charity?
That's mind-boggling.
It is.
Those numbers are just so big. Corporate giving was not a woohoo, look at it go. It's one of the smallest growth areas. What's happening with corporations then? Why is that not, there's more success out there, more money. So why aren't we seeing growth there in any kind of a sizable amount?
Well, in 2025, corporate giving reached $43 billion. That is the most corporate giving that we've ever seen in the history of giving, since we are at $617 billion overall. And we did see a 3% increase over 2025 this past year. My thoughts are that corporations really are meant to profit shareholders, and a benefit of having a corporation and being a generous community member is charitable giving. But that's not their purpose. Their purpose is to return value to shareholders. So it's always been a goal of charities to try to raise corporate giving by the very large corporations to at least 5% of pre-tax profits. And if they were able to do that and adhere to that, then we would see corporate giving very much more than we actually do. However, studies have shown that we are not reaching that anywhere near that. And thus, corporate giving, while it's an important sector, and for many organizations that might be doing a special event or a major underwriting, a corporation is a very visible institution to go after for a fundraising gift or fundraising investment. But we know that those are the smallest overall dollars that are given. And also, corporations plan their giving and they budget their giving. And starting in late summer or early fall, many corporations are looking to their 2027 budget. So for our listeners and viewers that are in the fundraising areas, that as they plan for 2027 calendar year, you might start reaching out to corporations and getting on their 2027 budget, especially if you have a 3 to 5 year history of corporate giving within your overall philanthropic portfolio.
It's not reflected in this report, but it will be interesting next year to take a look at this. The United States has been blessed, for the most part, to have the World Cup and what an opportunity that was. And communities really have stepped forward, as Kansas City has done so. What do you think that impact will be as we then come back and look at 2026? Will that adjust anything? Because there's been big philanthropic dollars spent supporting, those lifts in all these communities. What's your take?
My take is that there was a bunch of hype about World Cup coming to the United States, and that the hype might not equal the returns that we will see. We know that FIFA, being the international organization overseeing World Cup and World Soccer, is rather corrupt. And so, according to articles in the New York Times, they have been able to gouge Americans of high ticket prices, and also fans of World Cup teams football teams around the world. They've been able to gouge them for international visitors coming to the United States. Have we seen significant corporate underwriting? Absolutely, we've seen that. And that might be a reflection of a small uptick in giving for 2026, but I'm a bit skeptical, as you can see from some of the thoughts I have, and so I'll be interested to see if that is a significant factor when we look at our 2026 dollars.
Well, let's go back to the numbers we know right now, and that's in 2025 was not a major election year. Do you think that made any difference? This year will be with midterms. Does it really matter in terms of how people give and where increases are, et cetera?
Well, if we think about giving to political campaigns by Americans, by political action committees, and by dark political action committees and dark money as well, we see that Americans give, as reported through the federal FEC and the Federal Elections Commission, that giving every 4 years for presidential elections is probably going to be between $20 and $30 billion. And that's a lot of money, $20 to $30 billion. But if you take that 3 to 5 years also, and you think of charitable giving being at $600 billion or more, we're going to have nearly $3 trillion given to charity, while $30 billion is given to political campaigns. So you can see where the charitable sector and charities really don't have an excuse that its money is given to political campaigns versus to charitable giving. The numbers just don't come out like that. And if we look historically at Giving USA, we see that presidential election years, there is a spike in giving, obviously, to political campaigns, but that does not take away from giving to charities. And during presidential election years, which won't be for 2.5 years in the United States, we see giving still increasing in those years that we reelect or we elect a president.
Well, looking at all these kind of high points, and again, we will share the kind of at a glance document for our followers. What does this mean for nonprofits in Kansas City? What do we take away from having a report in this kind of data? How do we use it?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, because, this is the nerdish side and the science side of fundraising. And this is the mathematical side of fundraising. And I believe these numbers are important because directors of developments and CEOs should reflect these numbers and should provide these numbers to educate their board members and also their donors. I think the importance of how to utilize that is to overlay the numbers. 63% came from individuals, another 19 cents came from foundations, and 7 cents came from corporations. Look at your overall giving to your nonprofit and determine money that is given by individuals, by foundations, and by corporations, and see if you are reflective of the 64% given by individuals, the 19% given by foundations, or the 17%. You can then understand how you are adjusting to overall giving in the United States. You also could think about the uniqueness of your organization and how that your unique organization that might rely much more on foundation giving or giving by corporations, and how you might want to diversify that and create a larger giving by individual program. So I think that there are some analysis that a nonprofit needs to do. And then they need to take the analysis and create an action plan that is going to best suit their organization. We've worked with organizations over the years that have, 80% of their charitable dollars are coming from foundations. Well, that's a different type of nonprofit than we see in education giving, where educational giving is going to definitely supersede the 64% of individual giving. So I think it depends on the sector and it depends on the specific nonprofit, but you can model and determine how you want to grow or reduce your size of different categories by using Giving USA. That's the goodness of this tool that it represents for a nonprofit.
And the Lilly School does some other breakdowns of giving as well. I think it's a wonderful resource for nonprofits to go. I didn't attend Indiana. I didn't attend the Lilly School, so I'm not pushing it for that reason. But I've just found there's lots of interesting information that's available so that you can really take a deep dive or put it under a microscope and kind of think about your own nonprofit and where to go and what to look at. What should we be on the lookout for next year in just the moment or two we have left?
I think the moment or two we have left is going to be how Americans are feeling about the economy in 2027. And I think we'll understand that a little more through the fall elections when we have midterm elections in November of 2026, which, Ruth, is only like 3.5 months away. And so we're going to understand how Americans are feeling about our political system. And then that will reflect, I think, the outlook on some giving by Americans in 2027. So I'm going to look first to see how the election results are and how Americans post-voting are feeling about the economy. And if they feel good about the economy and the direction of the country, then I think we'll see an uptick in giving. I think if they're depressed and we see voting numbers down, and we see that the voters in post-voting surveys say that they don't have confidence in the economy, that we might see a bumpy economy in 2027 and a bumpy charitable giving cycle in 2027. So I am, however, optimistic that Americans are going to turn out plentifully, regardless if you're red or blue. I hope you vote. And I hope that the surveys that we see post-election are positive about the outlook of the economy. And I think that will reflect very well in 2026 giving then.
Dr. Philanthropy, thank you as always for unwrapping it for us and digging in and giving us such great advice and your wisdom.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you for joining us for Casey Cares. And this segment was brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, www.kauffman.org. Now, you can check out more about us at our website at caseycaresonline.org, and you can spread the love. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio, and Instagram, we're at Casey Cares Online. Don't forget, Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock in the morning, You can catch us on ESPN 1510 AM and 94.5 FM. Thank you for joining us on Casey Cares.